Noir Syndrome is a roguelike-esque procedural murder mystery game with a film noir 1940s setting. You play as a hard-boiled detective looking for a serial killer who calls themselves Anubis after the Egyptian god of death. You only have 13 days to find the killer, after which they will assassinate the mayor and flee the city. There is some question as to how your character knows all this, but we'll talk more about that later. The first thing I should note is the somewhat generic-looking, low-res pixel art style. For a game with such an original theme, it kind of sets a bad first impression, given how bland and blocky it makes everything look. It should be noted that this kind of pixel art is a whole different ball to what normal pixel art usually looks like. This kind of stick-figure pixel thing is relatively new, seen in games like McPixel or Home. This style is usually implemented for the sake of time, or because there's no experienced artists on the team. Traditional pixel art, like those seen in games in the 90s, is more grounded in many fine art traditions like Impressionism, paintings that were made up of many tiny visible strokes. In those days, the individual pixels are there strictly as a memory limitation, but with the art itself being as varied and complex as its impressionistic artists allowed. I do want to make this distinction because it does bother me when people wave off pixel art as a whole medium, because they fail to realize that it's been around for ages, and as such has a wide variety of styles and techniques associated with it. You want to write off pointillism too? Anyway, the point is, Noir Syndrome's take on pixel art pretty much does away with most of these techniques in favor of oversimplification. It's a very functional style, but not a very glamorous one. It does have one saving grace though, but we'll get back to that. So, what's the gameplay like? The main tool in your detective arsenal is investigating. While searching around town, you can use the investigation button to search for clues hidden in some places like trash cans, benches, church seats, clothing racks, and locked safes, which for some reason no one seems to mind you breaking into. Except when you break into the mob safe. They definitely care. Upon finding clues, you'll start to build up a sort of profile for the killer in your notes. Clues come in the form of random assortments of objects, which reveal something about the killer's hobbies, gender, or faction. Multiple clues are needed to put together a more specific profile, since finding leather gloves could reveal that the killer is either a driver or a chef, but finding new clues will eventually pinpoint which one it is. Once you've put together a profile, you'll need to find a person that matches your profile. The best way to accomplish this is to gossip townsfolk, each of whom has some kind of grudge or suspicion against another townsperson. This adds suspects to your list. Once you find a suspect that matches your deducted profile, you mark them, find them, and arrest them. Simple, right? Well, in theory. While the mechanics for deducing the killer are incredibly simple, the game does have a few tricks up its sleeve to keep you on your toes. Besides the time limit, which decreases by a day every time you visit and leave any location in town, you also have a hunger meter that dwindles down anytime you use your investigation ability, speak to anyone, or do any other kind of basic action. This is supposed to keep you from just mashing on the investigation button on every nook and cranny, but since there's no way to know which nook has clues and which cranny is barren, you wind up using a lot of your hunger just to get enough clues and suspects to get by. This sort of just makes hunger a nagging reminder that you have to buy some food to keep yourself from dying of starvation, but in some cases it does push you to take a shot in the dark at who the culprit is, based on the information you have, even when it's not a certainty. These kinds of gamble wins are actually incredibly satisfying when you succeed, so hunger is not without its purpose in pushing you to detect quickly. The other major obstacle the game puts in your way comes in the form of Hitmen. The Anubis killer knows you're onto them, and occasionally hires someone to take you out. These encounters are short, but oddly thrilling, as you only have a second to react when you see someone pull out their gun. In Noir Syndrome, a single bullet will take anyone out, including you, so to get out of this case alive, you better have a quick trigger finger. At this point, I should note that these threats only ever make any kind of impact on the hard difficulty setting. On normal, hunger is almost never a problem, and hitmen are nearly non-existent. This might be good for when you're learning the ropes, but the game suffers a lot when there's no stakes at hand. You still get a full 13 days to figure the case out no matter what difficulty you're on, so playing on hard is the only way to really get the most out of this game. Impossible mode really does live up to its name, though. I wouldn't recommend that one either. But even on hard, the game does struggle to maintain a good balance of challenge at the best of times. A lot of this has to do with the fact that evidence can be found in places often completely unrelated to the case, making where you go to investigate sometimes a fairly moot choice. While design-wise this makes your decisions feel less special, context-wise I don't have as big of a problem with it as other reviews have stated. A lot of Steam reviews ask things like, how do I know the pencil I find in the train station belongs to the killer? Isn't that something I should have to figure out myself? While this sounds fun in theory, it's not something that can be approached easily in a game. Because as much as we hate to admit it, most of us game-playing folk do not actually have the deductive reasoning skills of Sherlock Holmes. In fact, no one does.
Police don't consult amateurs.
When I met you for the first time yesterday, I said Afghanistan or Iraq. You looked surprised.
How did you know?
I didn't know, I saw. You hack up the way you hold yourself says military. The conversation as you entered the room, a bit different from my day. Said trained at Bart, so army doctor, obvious. The face is tan. With no talent on the wrists. You've been abroad but not sunbathing. The lips really bad when you walk, you don't ask for a chair when you stand like you've forgotten about it. So it's at least partly psychosomatic. That says the original circumstances of the injury were traumatic. Wounded in action then. Wounded in action, Santan, Afghanistan or Iraq.
You said I had a therapist.
Well, psychosomatic link, of course you've got a therapist. And there's your brother. The phone, it's expensive, email the name with MP3 player.
That was amazing.
Sherlock Holmes' deductive skills are basically a superpower that serves the same purpose as those magic photo-enhancing computers from crime shows. They exist only to give the characters access to the relevant information that the audience will actually understand and be able to follow along with. How do we know the pencil belongs to the killer? Because we magic deduced it like Sherlock Holmes. The relevant information here, the kind that is accessible to the audience, is that the pencil reveals that the killer is either a poet or an artist. Now, is this a perfect implementation of the fantasy of being a detective? No, but it is a valid one, and fits pretty well in line with the trappings of the genre. Keep in mind that not every game is made to boggle the mind. This is essentially an arcade abstraction of being a detective, not a simulation of it. And this brings me to the saving grace of the art style. It helps encourage an abstracted mindset. Noir Syndrome is entirely designed around abstracting classic mystery tropes into an easily digestible 15-minute experience. Where the characters more realistically rendered or had more detail, some of these abstracted mechanics might have stood out more as being out of place. The Killer Noir soundtrack complements this too, by providing some authenticity to the mix, giving your brain the fuel it needs to fill in the blanks left by these abstractions. Noir Syndrome isn't the best detective game, but it's one of the more interesting takes on the genre. I can't honestly say there are any other games I know of that can distill a whole organically woven detective story into a few spare minutes, and that's something this game manages to achieve in a way that's also replayable. Noir Syndrome won't last you long in a single sitting, as repetition can set in after subsequent playthroughs in a row, but I've found it's a comforting and unique little gem to return to when I want to kill a few glorious minutes as a private eye.